Yeah, hi there. Today we're going to talk about which accessibility tools are right for you. My name is Amy Duggan. I'm the CEO of Hook 42. But as I wear lots of different hats, there's some letters. What the last letter is that I'm a certified professional in accessibility concepts, really. And so that's where I'm going to wear that hat today. And a little bit of the PM and owner hat too. So let's get started. I'm from Hook 42. I'm going to go past the sales thing. But we do a lot of complex things, and one of them is accessibility, but we do a lot with Drupal. Who are you here? Who in the room is on the compliance team, perhaps? We've got two, like a fairly good percentage in here. Who writes content? Okay, a small percentage, similar. Who is a graphic designer or works with design? Same amount. Developer. Okay, most of the room is a developer. Who are boss peoples? Who are the management? We have a few. Okay. And of course, who's playing multiple roles, which is everybody that put their hands up. So we're going to talk about like this across roles, this topic. This is a big, heavy slide, so sorry about it. I do not get commissions from any tool that I put up here. I'm not a compliance lawyer. I'm going to talk fast. These slides will be posted. We're going to cover some new things, maybe some things that you've already heard. We all learn from each other, so if you have some information, please pop it up. And it's a huge topic, compliance. It's ginormous, and don't let the complexity please get you down. Stick with it, have perseverance. You can get through it, and it's more knowledge is good knowledge. So this is for the good of all. So I'm going to go through a little bit of Accessibility 101. This looks similar because I haven't switched whoever was in my accessibility training, the pictures are similar because I haven't swapped them out for this. But what is accessibility? Accessibility is the design of products, devices, services for people who experience disabilities. And the context in which we are talking, for this session, is web accessibility, right? And because accessibility is like everything, like can you get into this building? Can I use this? Can I use an iPhone, right? So web accessibility supports social inclusion for all individuals, so everybody can get the information and services that are provided through web systems. And a lot of times you'll see the numeronym A11Y or ally, so that it means accessibility. It's just accessibility is really long to type, and I always forget like that middle I, and I always have a squiggly line. I'm not the only one, I hear a giggle. So successful web accessibility is perceivable, you can understand it, or operable, you can work with it, it's understandable, and it's robust. And so this term is poor. So poor on the accessibility. And it's a lifestyle and not just a one-time thing. So you can't be like, oh, cool, I'm accessible, and then never not recheck if you are accessible, because technology changes, your content changes, that type of thing. And it's really coupled nicely with usability and inclusion. And take this away, any improvements that you're doing are improvements. That's positive change. Keep it going. Who is it for? Everyone. But really a lot of, like 57 million Americans, this is stats from the US, sorry, 20% have some type of disability, but there are disabilities like visual impairments, hearing, but there's cognitive impairments, learning impairments, mobility impairments, and then there's temporary disabilities. If anybody met Amy June downstairs from our team, she has a broken arm, right? So she has to use her tools in a different way. Also, I'm getting older, we're all getting older, right? So the aging populace has some disabilities that maybe they didn't have before. And then also English is a second language. A lot of people forget, like, hey, not knowing the native language is hard, and I need to spend longer time on a page. I need to interact with things in a more simpler way. And yeah, my English is interesting. Good morning. The accessible population breakdown, just to take away, we just talked about, like, there's about 20%, 21% of people who identify with no difficulties, 16 with minimal, 37 with mild, and then 25% with severe. And then there's just like all sorts of the really super specialized products to interact with information. You know, it's like good business and like good design. You want to really target the 80%, right? But you can actually, with following compliance and testing for compliance, you can target the 99%, right? So that's kind of the approach and the concept that we're taking. What's nice and interesting, if you don't understand what a person with disabilities goes through, and like working with information and working with things in the world, there are some accessible web personas that have been written, and they were provided by the W3G. And so who's used personas in their design and web and testing? Okay, about like a little over half the room, but this is a very common thing to say. Can, you know, Jane Doe, the target consumer of this demographic, use the site as they would use it for their own need? And so these are accessible personas that attest. And it's great, so it gives a start on persona development and applies through UX, UI, and testing phases, because you can test it, can that person actually get the information they need? A lot of times with accessibility UI, it's required. You have to, right? So who has heard this word of 508 compliance? Okay, most everybody in the room. So you have to, right? So that's one of the things. Inclusive, everyone should have full access to the web, right? That's the good human thing. And expansive, right? If you have a hotel and you would like anyone to book there, you can have a potential 20% increase in the people who can use your site to book, right? But you ask kind of like, well, what about all the website owners that don't have to or don't feel that they need to for their business? Yeah, you know, that's okay. It's something that you have to understand on your own needs and address, like, how am I going to address accessibility? And when you go through testing, it's not about blame, it's about understanding and improvement. So park all of the like finger pointing, other than like finger point at why the test fails and how to fix it, right? So this is like maintain positive, maintain change. It's good. So accessibility came from the rehabilitation. Well, the idea has been around for a long time, but legally, there's the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. It's split in many different compliance sections. The section 508 means accessible information technology in government. That's why the 508 number is so tangible with the technology environment. Also, you'll hear and you'll see in RFPs or whatever, oh, are you 508 ADA compliant? You're like, why are you throwing these letters and numbers at me? But the Americans with Disability Act of 1990 is the current base law. But it is stemming off of and related to heavily with 508. I am not a lawyer, I'm not a compliance lawyer. Read these things for yourself, but I'm just helping you guys understand. And this is like the Schoolhouse Rock law, so it's cute. So what's interesting, and this is like, there are industries and organizations that need to say, hey, I would like to prove that I have done compliance. And so there's something that's called a VPAT, which is Voluntary Product Accessibility Template, and it's created by an organization of leading software companies that were like saying, hey government, you said I have to comply, but you have no way for me to tell you I am compliant, or I'm trying to. So they got together and they put this VPAT together. So this is voluntary, but there's strict like formatting and how to do this. And this is important because sometimes, I'm air quoting here, voluntary is not voluntary if you need to prove to the government because you are a publicly funded institution like the UC system or like a government, like a city or state organization. So this is something that's very helpful. So I'm going to go over that there are three big kind of web accessibility initiative standards for the web and supporting CSS tools. A lot of times you'll hear tons and tons about WCAG, which is funny. pronunciation, but Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. And there's, the old one was WCAG 2.0, so you might have seen those letters a lot and numbers. But in June 5th, we've got 2.1 that's been extended. So June 5th of this year, so it's very recent. So WCAG is how do you see the website, right? How is the website delivered to you? ATAG is the authoring tool accessibility guidelines. And so what those are, it's like Drupal's a CMS. So it's the CK editor. Is your CK editor accessible? Are the forms that you enter in, like the content types, accessible? And then also, hey, is PHP Storm accessible? Right, that's a developer tool. Those are authoring tool accessibility guidelines. And those are built on and extending of the WCAG guidelines. And then there's user agent accessibility guidelines, and that's how does your tech stack kind of work in with a person's, the user agent is like the technical stuff that chews up the website, and it's like system level. So this is user agent. So how can I communicate to something like a screen reader through the computer, my website? That's kind of a weird way to explain it, but sorry. There's a lot of information you guys can read, thousands of pages, read it. We're covering this one here. And this is what you'll see mostly. So, and if you take a look at this image, you can see it's kind of like content delivered to a person through a browser is the middle of a Venn diagram of accessibility, like authoring tools, creating the content, the web tools, delivering the content, and the guidelines actually formulating how is that code content communicating to assistive technologies like screen readers. So this is a nice visual to that, what I just described. All right, I'm going to keep going fast, so pardon me. WCAG has conformance levels, so how accessible are you? Are you accessible or not is not binary. So you have the rating is A, the lowest level of accessibility, but it's the thing that like impacts the broadest amount of people. Well, not really, no, A is lowest. The broadest amount is AAA, pardon me. If you have 508, Section 508 compliance, if you target WCAG AA, that fulfills as much as you can the 508 compliance. There's no easy mapping, there's all sorts of graphs, but AA is what a lot of people reach for. AAA is the highest level of conformance, and there are certain organizations that must get to that level. And so for each level, one must pass all the tests. So you can't be AAA and fail at an A test, okay? So you must pass A. You can't get an A and an F at the same time, right? So, like grade school, grades. Okay, but meeting total AA compliance is very difficult for a whole site, if not impossible, because some web elements, media players, some of them don't get AAA compliant. And if you have an embedded video, then you're like always only going to get to maybe to AA on that page, right? So this is, conformance is rated per page or per total page process, like a checkout or an admissions form for UC Berkeley here. And you must meet conformance for only the technologies you use. So if you have a site and there's no video, then that's great. You don't have to pass the video compliance because there's no video. Great. Okay, cool. So you should understand it just so you are aware the minute somebody puts a YouTube video on your site, what does that mean? But you don't need to do it until it's there. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about the WCAG conformance levels. Principles is poor, and we'll get that in a second. Guidelines is just how to communicate it, right? Success criteria is the test. Is your color contrast ratio exactly this? That is the test. Do you pass or fail? And then there are these things called advisory techniques, which are essentially how to pass a test, right? So that's as you look at the thousands and thousands of pages of accessibility information on the web, this is the concepts, the simple concepts here. And guidelines is something also that an organization called usability.gov uses to convey their design guidelines and usability that also are really tight with accessibility, because criteria and numbered and grouped by the POUR principles, and understandable is one of them, operable is one of them, and those are tied heavily to usability choices that you make in design and content and that type of thing. But I would really like to explain what the sections are, and I'm going to show some really heavy slides in a second, but it's going to convey what the sections are. So if you write out POUR, each one has a number based on what letter you're looking at. So perceivable is 1, operable is 2, understandable is 3, and robust is 4. So the information that why this is important, and if you can only remember the top 4, that's going to be great, because you'll see a lot of things in testing tools. You failed 1.2.3. What the heck does that mean in context? And they'll give you like, oh, you can solve it like this or whatever, but if you know 1.2.3, oh, that's a perceivable thing, right? Okay, I'm going to be in that general area. So this is how to start interpreting data you get from your tools. Sorry, I'm getting to the tools. So we have, this is just a quick overview. So you can see perceivable 1 is grouped in sections that are conceptually similar. Text alternatives is 1.1, and the test is the 3rd dot down. So these success criteria are, do you have non-text content for images? How are you managing audio only and video only type of work? So this is giving you an example of perceivable and how are they clumping perceivable tests to pass or fail. Does this make sense with that explanation? A lot of people don't explain it like this, but it's like, oh, that's where the numbers. And I had that aha moment as I was looking at things. I was like, oh my gosh, that's the number. Oh, I can totally remember now. And I don't have to, I can be aware of the big lists of these success criteria, but I can look at a website to reference information about it, but I do not have to crank through and know all the numbers, because look at how many numbers there are. So look at, there's a lot of numbers here, and there's a lot of numbers there, and there's some more numbers there, and this is not, we haven't even gotten to 4 yet, which is, robust, but robust at least is small. Right, that one's easier. Oh, I can remember that. But it's a good takeaway, right? So we're going to get through this. And then there's 5 that doesn't mix in POUR. This is just your conformance guidelines. So it's very important that there is another number, but it would become pork. That's just not as sexy as POUR, I think. But anyway, it's conformance. So this is just a big quick sample, because part of testing is remediation and knowing how to fix things. There are these techniques, and they're grouped within a scope, and they're also numbered in a big way. But there's 206 techniques. I was not going to put all those on a slide deck, right? Because there's lots and lots. But they have code samples and defined test steps, right? And implementation and use cases and samples. And they map them to the success criteria up here, right? So you can have general technique number 3 mapped to success criteria 2.1.3. And you're like, oh, cool, thank you for doing that mapping work. Now I can really cross-reference within my tools. How do I find something I can fix? And this is just a quick look at the usability.gov guidelines, because they have a number system with a chapter and a section number, so it looks very similar. And these are also referenced by testing tools. And they give guidelines and examples. So, But one of the big things, and when you're working with what testing do I do, is like, hey, how long does this take? How long does accessibility take? Do I have money for it? Do I know how to do it? Because how do you know to test things if you don't know what you're testing? That's why I open this up with like a little intro. Also, lack of skills. Maybe you know how to test and you're using your tools, but you don't have a development team to remediate or fix things. That's a big challenge, right? And then also, do you understand the laws, or do you retrofit the changes in, or do you have to build a whole new site? So these are some interesting obstacles. But that's about it. So the order of this is not as smooth as I'd like, but one of the big important things about testing accessible web is understanding that the code must be accessible. I'm going to just simplify here. First of all, you need to start with an HTML solid foundation, and HTML5 has huge improvements and supports the structure semantically for accessible tools and integration with accessible technologies and assistive technologies. So you start with your HTML, do your CSS, do your JavaScript, and then they have this 4-letter word up here called ARIA. ARIA is, I'm just going to say, no ARIA is better than bad ARIA. And I'm going to say that a few times. So ARIA is special tags that you can help communicate to your assistive technology how it should work. Okay, but before I get into the ARIA slide, there is accessible HTML5. This has great coverage across browsers. So if you're looking at doing themes, one of the challenges, you might be working with an older site that's not HTML5 yet, right? Especially if you're working with some really old sites. And you're like, that's when you're like, hey, should I retrofit or make a new theme? Really take away, the first thing you need to do is have nice, clean, semantic HTML5 code, and that will get you a lot of the way there. But there's some rules with ARIA, which is accessible, rich internet applications. And this is tons of training and whatever. But basically the big rule is don't use it if you don't know how to do it. But use native HTML5 elements. Use a button as a button, and headings as headings. And use sections like main for your content. Use the header and content info sections correctly. And don't change native semantics if you have to. So in some themes like Bootstrap, it uses a lot of divs to drive a lot of what it's doing. You don't know what a div is. Your system is like, is it a button? It's just a div. It's like, okay, div. So there are ways to say, oh, this div can act like a button, please, and you can use ARIA tags to do that. But you want to make sure that you use them correctly, right? So you have to be very aware. Also, all interactive controls must be used with the keyboard, and we'll talk a little bit about that. And don't use role presentation, which is going to just be passed over by assistive technology, or ARIA hidden equals true, because it'll be passed over with technology. And all interactive elements must have an accessible name, because assistive technology will read out what the thing that you're interacting with. Like, this is my, submit the admission request button. It's like it needs to be clear. So I'm going to get through this faster. So first of all, as you are getting into your tools, you want to really identify your needs, right? And so if you are a developer and you don't have to do accessibility because no one's telling you, but you are human and you want to have good intentions, that's one of the things you have to go, hey, where am I coming from? Or if you want to do due diligence, like do the right thing. If your business wants to provide more services to more people, if you have target personas that will be within one of the groups that would really benefit from accessibility, then that's good. Also, if you are required legally to do accessibility, what is your compliance level? What proof of compliance do you need? Do you need the data just in time, just to make sure it's there, or do you need to track data over time for proof? proof of change, proof of improvement, that type of things. So you have to identify your resources. Who do you have on your team? Can your team constantly test? Do they know how to interpret the test results? Do they know how to use the tools? Your tech, which tools are you using to test, right? That type of thing. And also your budget. Do you have money to spend on tools or people to help remediate issues? So I'm zooming right through. We're going to talk a little bit about accessibility testing specifically now. There are a few methods of testing, and some are automated, and I changed, technically, the organization will call things automated or manual, but I stuck another level in here. So automated, in my sense, is that you can use tools like continuous integration tools. Who has heard of continuous integration tools? Many of the folks. So a CI tool is going to be something like, oh, I've checked in a change. I'm going to run a suite of tests to see if the change that I've checked in, like a new content type or a new field, I'm going to see if that's going to break anything. And then it can run compliance checks against that. So it's just one more test in your CI suite of things that you can use. And then you have some things that are scheduled site scanners that can crawl all your pages and test each one. And that's really nice because some sites don't just have 5 pages or 100 pages. Even 100, even 200 is kind of approachable, but some pages have thousands of pages or tens of thousands. And do you guys want to sit and manually test every single one of those? No. It'll be interesting. But then there are some things that are called tool assisted, I called it. But it's automation plus manual button pushing. And so as you are a developer and you are testing your new field that you're adding, and maybe it's a media field, so it has images and you need to make sure your alt text is good, you want to make sure on your development box you have the tools to test if that's working. And so you can have a test per page, right? And it's not necessarily going everywhere. So there's a little manual work. So you have to press a button. I want this one page. I'm going to choose it. I'm going to take a look at it, that type of thing. And this is run as needed by a developer or a content contributor. So this comes down to also people can mess up accessibility on the content team if they incorrectly use content markup. So this is interesting. And then there's manual, which is don't use any tools, just look at the code or use assistive technology and interact with the page, right? So that's a whole other level of testing. All of them are necessary. All of them are important, and they just take a different place in the process of accessibility testing and remediation. But the best tool is your brain. So first of all, because some of these things that are the success criteria cannot be necessarily programmatically tested. They can get close, you can be informed by tools, but you can't necessarily answer all the questions without just saying, oh, does the alt text make sense in this picture within this context? How does the computer know how to make sense of what this is? Now there's some interesting tools to maybe that get there with a little AI and stuff like that, but in the end, the best tool is your brain and the knowledge you learn by reading all of the documentation for all those success criteria. So basically know the info, and knowledge is power, but it's okay, there's a lot of information. Start in the context of the current work that you're working on and work out, and know how to use the reference websites. That's why I explained what those success criteria are. That's one of the most important things in using accessibility tools, is knowing what they're talking about. So when we get into a little deeper types of tools, there are authoring tools plugins. That is like a plugin for Office or Adobe PDF or CK Editor. There's plugins that you can go directly into those. There are web browser plugins, right? Like little bookmarklets. Who uses browser plugins here for accessibility? Okay, we've got like a few folks. There are command line tools. Who uses any command line tools in here? Okay, a couple, 2 or 3. These are developer level type of things. These are also things that you can wrap into your CI automated testing system. Okay, but then there's also some desktop applications, right? And I've used one for years and years. It's the Power Mapper sort site, because you can install it on your machine, and sometimes it's only like for Windows or whatever. You'll be constrained by what OS these tools are sitting on, but you can then scan and test things behind firewalls because it's on a desktop or a server that you can put behind a firewall. But the data is central to that machine. It's not on a shared dashboard anywhere. So there's like, oh, that's cool, I can get it behind the firewall, but oh wait, I want that data to be seen by lots of people. How do I get that to happen? And then there's like mobile applications, so there's iOS testers and that type of thing. Then there's a lot of online tools, or SaaS. Who's heard the word SaaS before? Software as a service. Tools like SortSite, Power Mapper, SiteImprove, Tenon, Wave. Who's heard of any of these names before? Half the room raised their hand. So we'll get through in that. But then there's also scope of testing tools, and I alluded to that with the desktop version of SortSite. Do you have an organizational dashboard that people can log in and see what results the tests are? Do you even need that? You're just a developer doing the good and right thing. Do you need that for your work? There's some sites that can do the full crawl or partial sites crawls. Then you have those single page testing moments that you have. And then you have like single concept testing, right? Like the readability. So part of accessibility is making sure the content is clear and understandable, right? Understandable, people can understand the words, and so you have to have a certain readability index. So like for AAA or AA, it's like grade 9. And so there's testing tools that you can see. Oh, hey, is my content, are the words matching there? Also, there are some interesting like single test, you can just test your colors or your fonts, or you can do like a multi-test environment where you're like, hey, I need to do very specialized applications, multi-process applications, and there's some key testing tools that can cover that. And sometimes there's environment-specific ones. You can see a 508.asp, right? It's like, oh wait, we don't use ASPs in Drupal. But you should know that it exists because maybe you're in an environment that has some sites that use the Microsoft platform. So some of these challenges of the tools are like costs. Some of these are much more expensive than others. Also, how do you allow and provide a testing suite for your content editors who may not be technical? And how do you work with firewalls or logins or authenticated pages? And how do you work with these real complex pages and processes? How do you identify tests that the tools didn't pick up? And that's a huge thing because like none of these tools, I said the first tool you can use is your brain, but a lot of the tools can only do so much to programmatically find compliance issues. You need to actually go through and manually test some of the things because the tool's not going to find if you're breaking a compliance issue or not. Also, you get false positives and negatives from these tools, right? So you have to make sure, they do a pretty good job, but then you can go through and clean those up. And then it's how to prioritize the remediation of issues is sometimes interesting. And one more time, meeting AAA compliance may not be possible on some pages because some elements are only compliant to the AA level. So who's heard is free before? Yeah, a few hands. Okay. So I can get a free plugin. And that free plugin is awesome because I can press the button on my own browser. Oh, but is that plugin now 2.1 compliant? Oh no, that hasn't been updated yet. So is it testing the right level? Oh, that plugin's not supported anymore. That plugin is causing a security hole. That, And how do I tell this data from this plugin to someone else or to the 5 developers I need to have fix it, right? So these are normally used for single page testing or very spot checks. They are super helpful. You should use them, but you should understand that they have manual effort that goes with it. So free is not free. You have to take time to use them. Also, some people can't install more things on their desktops because they are driven by a government organization, and you cannot have administrative access to change your computer. Well then, what are you gonna do? Oh, and you're behind a firewall and you're on a secure thing, and you better not walk into a secure area with a piece of equipment that's not allowed, because that is a real environment for a lot of people. And so there's so many plugins, which ones to use, and the results are localized to the computer. And then also I found this one that was neat. It's like, oh yeah, scan your page, scan your site, but then it plopped it on a big public page. Hey, this site over here just got scanned. And you're like, no, you don't do that. Please, manual testing, let's go into it's time consuming. It requires skills and education to know what you're looking at. And humans need to go, is this right? But this testing effort can be including colors and fonts, media elements, content readability, code reviews. These are all can be tool assisted. You can use those one-off tools or even SaaS tools to do that. And but the big part of manual testing is using assistive tools as a real user would. Who has used a screen reader in this room? We have 2, 3, 4 people.
I tried it. It was overwhelming.
Yeah, and one who has tried it and overwhelming. And thank you, because that's the perfect segue of you're developing and okay, I'm going to use a screen reader. But they have some equivalent tools here, so I'm going to get into a little bit about that. But the first one is Admiral App Bar. It's a trap. So the first thing I want to say is when you do manual testing, the first and easiest thing you can do is tab through your web page and use the keyboard to test to see if you can navigate and know where you are on a page, because that's very similar to what an assistive text like the screen readers will do, right? Or an assistive device, okay? So yeah, how could I navigate this page if I couldn't use a mouse? And that's good. So take this away and always remember, it's a trap. And then you'll never forget that you need to do a keyboard trap. But we talked a little bit about I think that my deck is out of order for this one, but sorry, just hang tight. Part of quote-unquote manual testing is if you do have desktop software, you might have to trigger it. You might have to interact with it, to read it, to look at it. But one of the things here is you can have a full suite that does accessibility and readability, maybe a lot of SEO, because SEO and accessibility are really complementary. So this is just all these slides will be up, so you guys don't have to write down really quick. But Sort Site is a nice one to install, but it's only on Windows. I think they might have a Mac version, but a lot of these are kind of interesting. There's a bunch of screen readers. One thing that's super awesome, I am not getting paid by them, but I'm going to act as an agency owner or a team of developer leader. There's something called JAWS Inspect. And JAWS is a screen reader, and it likes to live on Windows, and it's hard. It's not that it's hard to use. It has a learning curve. All of the readers have a learning curve because you interact with them with keystrokes that are special. So all of these, JAWS Inspect will go through a page and present a transcript in a digital format written so you can read exactly how the voice is going to sound, so you can hear exactly what it is. So out of all of this, that's awesome. I was like, oh man, and I'm talking to them. I was like, I need to talk to you more. Because for dev teams, that's really fantastic, right? And you can get these clippings of what is the issue, and then you can put it in your Jira system and then actually do something about it. So I'm gonna get going. So screen readers in use, Mac users use Apple VoiceOver as native in the iOS. Windows users has NVDA, which is free and works with Firefox. JAWS costs money, but is really good and a lot of people do it. Chrome is Google Chrome Vox. But if you use Linux, which some developers do, there are some readers too. So that's everybody who put their hands up, like you're a developer, you can put something on Linux. And which one is choose, and it's like, oh, which one's on my system. Also, the Windows 10 platform has Narrator native into the system, and that works with Edge. It doesn't mean that it's like super great or anything, but it's there. Like you don't have to buy it. So, and JAWS is cool because you can script it, so you can work with custom applications pretty well. And the real big success for screen readers is there a meaningful sequence on the page? Is it navigable? Do you have a clear focus order of where your kind of active element is on the page? Do they know what the link purposes is? Who's done the read more link? Read more what? Right? Is it predictable? Is your navigation changing? Can you skip over certain sections? And also, is there input assistance? And who's ever done a big form and you press the button and it had an error message and it wiped out all your data? Yeah, that sucks. So how are you dealing with error identification and input pretty well? And so, anyway, accessibility. You keep using that word. I do not think it means what you think it means. But anyway, let's move on because I'm going long, but that's okay. You guys can ask questions. But with SaaS solutions, each have their own benefits and limitations. Some being cost or accessibility. Not accessibility, but like, can you access your own site with it? And some costs are okay for departmental budgets, right? Like I like PowerMapper a lot. It's like $70 a month or something like that. And it can give me a lot of information, but it doesn't have some things like that you'd want to look at. SiteImprove is really good. SiteImprove is got a lot of things for big organizations, like neat dashboards and stuff like that for information roll-ups. And those are good for really centralized compliance teams. Tenon is one of the best. So a lot of these tools also have these like, how good are they at detecting errors and are they correct? Tenon is like, got one of the best ones. PowerMapper has a free trial, but a monthly subscription. SiteImprove, I know how they bill, but it's not public. You'd have to talk to them. I'm not gonna speak for them, but I really like the product. Also, the Accessibility Resource Center by Pacello Group is the people that actually I think make JAWS. It's just like they have an online dashboard system that's nice. And then also, has anybody used this tool called Wave? Yeah, so a hands up. It's a single page tool, also a plugin, but then Dynalytics is a dashboard that's an extension of that tool. So you can see and all of these places, well, except PowerMapper, I don't think, has like plugins to do like a single page test, like on the fly. So that actually works really well if you have content editors and you have a SiteImprove account. They can just click their page and it checks all those things. Also, for tools, there's some readability, checking your colors and planning your colors, fonts and fonts kerning, vertical rhythm. All of those things are important. And here's some more tools. This is a screening of the single page Wave tool, and this is the manually assisted one. Here's some plugins. These are Mac ones. I need to get like my Windows box out to put those up. And then command line tools is a huge talk on its own. We can do that. The use case I did discuss earlier about automating testing in your CI environment, and the best suite is defined by your needs and the staff, right? But Pally is a tool that the developers can use in the command line that can be tied in the CI. And then there's a bunch of Node NPM type of based tools that you can leverage within your development process. And then remediation. Well, you can press the magic button because it fixes everything. And there's a module for that, like typed on the screen, but because that's also kind of funny for Drupal. But you really start at the very beginning, please. Seriously, like, really tie this in your design and your planning, and then it's really good. But if you need to prioritize how to fix things, ask yourself some questions about which do you have to fix first. Do you have time or budget? Do you get low-hanging fruit ones really out? Do you have the skills? Can you delegate fixes, right? And how do you track that they've even been fixed, right? And that's like choosing a test suite that you can use over time to say, oh yeah, I have fixed this and the test does not error anymore, that type of thing. Where to start? A lot of times we like to split issues into content or code, especially in the Drupal environment, because you have content teams sticking in content into your site. Maybe you teach them, and maybe you teach them how to use the tools and support them, but the code part is like, oh, but I have a theme. I can update the theme in the CSS. So split the issues into both and define the teams that are responsible for them, and perhaps give education to your content team to say, hey, you really need to do the heading structure so it's navigable, right? It's something like that. And maybe say, hey, the team needs authoring tools to actually make accessible content. That's a huge thing, because Drupal's great. There's a lot of stuff out of the box, but man, sometimes you just need the abbreviation module just so they can actually properly attribute an abbreviation like ADA, right? And then you can create parallel improvement paths to really make change, a good change move. And so, prioritization is a combination of the issue, the impact, and the complexity. If you don't have to be AAA compliant, don't fix that first. Fix the A ones first, right? Sometimes it's really hard to fix. Sometimes it's super easy, right? So, and do that. Impact. I always like to say, fix the things that happen in your blocks that are used on every page, because that one error can make every page not compliant, right? So fix the things in the header and the footer. Fix your navigation. Do that, and then, okay, now all these other things are easier to see that surface maybe through content. And then also revisit if you're breaking any success criteria. Oh, I already said that. Okay. I just didn't click the button. Wow, you're slow, screen. Okay. And then here we go. This is a sample prioritization of parallel improvements, right? And I just said that out loud, so I'm just going to put that here. And you can do it. Center yourself. Have your determination, because it's a lot of moving parts, because everyone benefits. Start out right. Understand compliance, know your environment, and accessibility is ongoing. Don't stop doing it. It's fun. So, all right, thank you guys. This is great. You guys any questions? We have one.
So do you have any specific experience or specific guideline examples of applying ARIA attributes to custom elements or web components semantically? Because they're not just divs, they're custom markup.
The question is, do we have any examples of applying ARIA to, you explicitly asked
HTML custom elements.
HTML custom elements. So the reason why I asked, did you explicitly ask a certain word, because ARIA has specific things,
right,
elements called widgets and applications. Widgets, Caroline, yeah. Widgets are more like little blocks on the page, whereas applications are like a multi-step process form. An application would be closer to, a very rich multi-step process form, like maybe, putting a real estate, like house purchase online. Go ahead.
So on the W3C website, they have design patterns for ARIA.
Right.
Where they give examples for how.
Oh yeah, that was interesting.
So for any given ARIA widget role, so something like tab or tree view, they have a sample code that you can start with that gives
Right.
an example of how to develop this kind of widget. I'm not sure if that answers your question.
Yeah,
Right.
I mean, but semantically applying those, the guidelines are about native HTML elements, but in the web components world, you've got custom elements that have custom attributes. So how does that play into
Right.
semantic accessibility?
So the extended question, and the answer was there's a lot of examples that exist online. Then it's like, wait, you have custom things. But ARIA has its own defined set of attributes that you can apply to your custom things and how you want it to act with assistive tech.
Okay.
Okay, and that's why semantically, that's why I was like, what word are you trying to say? Because words mean very specific thing for ARIA, right? Are you an application? Are you a widget? And things are very specific in HTML5. Are you a button? Are you a link? And the big takeaway from that is you can have, like, absolute power corrupts absolutely is ARIA. That's why the first rule is don't even do it if you don't know what you're doing. But if you're getting really in depth of a custom application, really know what those tools are using and test it in the tech, because you can communicate to assistive tech what you need to do using that. But you just have to be careful, right? And you should watch Carolyn's talk from yesterday, because she goes into like the name, role, and values and stuff like that. So that's really fantastic. It's just interesting. Like one example of a big, nice form that I like to look at is United Airlines. Like they have a ton of like ARIA labels all over it, because that complete complex process of like getting a seat on an airplane is a big deal and custom, right? Because you have to pick your seat, you have to see what's available. So you should take a look at doing like something like that with a screen reader, because that's fun. But seriously, it's interesting. But the answer is you have to read more documentation. You have to be very careful, and that, like, if you even see all the training from like accessibility and ARIA, it's like really know what you are doing when you get into there,
Okay.
right?
Yeah. Follow up a little bit is that ARIA provides semantics where HTML doesn't have anything existing for those semantics. So you could basically just find the thing, so an ARIA role provides semantics.
Right.
So if you just find the set of roles or the pattern that most closely matches what you're trying to do. And if it's not in HTML, then it's probably going to be an ARIA, and you'll be able to define most of what you need that way.
Right. For example, in HTML5, a nav has role equals navigation in ARIA. And so, and there's very specific types of roles that you can go to, and you just have to be very mindful and deliberate with things that you choose. But you can totally clobber and override HTML by using the ARIA roles. So that's why everybody's like, oh, be super careful, because sometimes you can actually just oops it, right? Oops, I chose the wrong role here. And if you're doing like a field formatter in Drupal and you're like, oops, I put the wrong role there, but it broke it across the site, then that's interesting. So that's kind of the developer and Drupal understand that as you make these tools for the content editors to use, then you have to be very, very careful, because it can cause problems on many pages, if not. So, yeah, go ahead.
I guess I was just going to go back to the beginning where you're talking about know what you're testing. So we have a standard, we have to follow AA.
Yeah.
And we're introducing this into, where we have Java, PHP, PeopleSoft, a variety of developers. So they know like, oh, I have to do WCAG AA, but then what do they do? I loved how you said, oh, know what that is, and starting out how to testing it. So how do you? Yeah,
so I'm going to succinctly ask the question a slightly different way for the video. So the question is basically, regardless of the web technology you're using, how do you know if you're compliant? And that kind of answers the question, is you can use PHP or JSP or Java, and the output itself is going to be HTML for them to read. So it's based on, but the right thing for you guys to do is go, oh, this is a Drupal website, and this is a WordPress one, and this one is a Workday application, right? And then you can say, oh, I have no ability to update the PeopleSoft Workday application because it's all proprietary. I need to just give them a bug. But I can do this work on my WordPress and PHP site or my custom Java app. Is that an application or is it just web? So taking an inventory of what your sites are, identifying the tech that they are using is great, but that's still a test. If it's a web interface, you're going to use the same test. It's just that's the remediation planning after, right? How do I actually then deal with the issues at hand?
Yeah, well, I guess we're trying to introduce it into the developers, because right now, if you were to ask them, they're like, they don't do any accessibility testing. So we're trying to develop like a plan and a curriculum to make them aware. So I was just curious, like, would you start out with saying, all right, we know the standard, but what is, they don't even know for example. And we would just...
Oh, but that's the education, and that's the same education that you would, because like the accessibility training that we held here at Bad Camp covers that, and we've used that to kind of bootstrap what is accessibility for developers and content team, right, and designers, right? So it's education and awareness is the first round, and the question for the video is, hey, I've got a group of developers that know not even the first part of accessibility. How do you start? And the answer is education, general education. And then once you have to tactically get through the rest of your sites in your organization, then that's that very strategic, like, what is the inventory of what I'm doing? Is everybody educated? And then chipping away at it, right? So, Chaz, go ahead.
Yeah. I was wondering about tools within Drupal itself, and my specific areas of concern are being able to monitor things like whether content providers are using appropriate link text and alt text.
There is nothing that's great in Drupal 8 right now to do that. There are challenges in the Drupal 7 tools, like, hey, that was a great thing, but it's totally not supported anymore because the module maintainers stopped supporting it, 5 years ago. Yay. There are some things, it's like, oh, cool, that works great if your field is a body, but we're using paragraphs or field collections and it doesn't do the whole DOM. So my answer very quickly to that is use a tool that goes outside in, period.